Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Community Energy webinar hosted by SP Energy Networks and supported by Energy Saving Trust. I'm Nathan Hill. I'm Head of Community and Renewable Energy at the Energy Saving Trust. I'll be host for this evening, but mercifully for everyone attending tonight, I will keep my own musings to a minimum and give as much time as possible to our fantastic presenters and our breakout group discussions. This will be the first of a three-part series of events. We have aligned our workshop themes with what stakeholder groups have taught us are the biggest knowledge or capacity gaps. So tonight the theme is technology and community energy projects, which will strengthen your understanding of how different technologies can be used to meet your community energy needs. The second event in the series will be a hybrid event, so both online and in person will be available. The theme will be innovation in community energy projects, so how innovation can be brought into community energy projects. The third event in the series will either be in-person or hybrid event, depending on demand from you all for either format. The theme will be connection between generators and users, so how community energy projects can connect renewable energy generators to the end users. So the purpose of these events is to help you, A, learn about community energy projects, so discover if they're a good fit for your community. B, brainstorm project ideas, so get insights for developing your own community energy initiatives. And C, to find support, connecting you with resources to turn your ideas into reality. We hope that this group of organisations with us tonight can continue the journey with us throughout this workshop series. That's the intention, to take this core of organisations not through just the agenda tonight, but through this series of events. And that is the intention of the series. One last thing from me before I hand over to Louise. This event will be recorded and is currently being recorded. I hope everyone's okay with that. And if you're not, do let us know. Okay, so I will now hand over to Louise Taylor from SP Energy Networks to give a brief introduction to their role in supporting community energy projects. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Nathan. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all very much for coming along. So I am Louise Taylor, and I am the Community Energy Engagement Manager for the SPM licence area. I've just got a few slides I'd like to cover with you all, just to give you a brief introduction of who we are at SP Energy Networks and our role within community energy. So SP Energy Networks, we are part of the Scottish Power Group, which is owned and operated by the Spanish company Iberdrola. And we've been a key part of this group now for over a decade, which has kept us clearly ahead of the energy transition in order to tackle the challenges posed by climate change and the need for clean electricity. So our main role within the Scottish Power Group is being the DNO, so the Distribution Network Operator. We are a completely different business to that of Scottish Power Retail, so regardless of who you pay your bill to, if you live in our licence area, we are the one who moves the electricity to and from the homes and businesses across our network. Scottish Power and SP Energy Networks, we have complete business separation and we're regulated completely different by Ofgem. So we have three regulated electricity businesses. We've got the SP Transmission, which looks after anything above the 33 kV network. We've got the SP Distribution Network, which is anything under the 33 kV network, and the SPM licence, which is anything under the 132 kV. Anything above 132 in the MANWEB comes under National Grid. So we're working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to keep the lights on. We provide electricity to 3.5 million customers across our two distribution licences. We have 30,000 substations, so that's one for every 100 customers, 40,000 kilometres of overhead lines, and 65,000 kilometres of underground cables. This is an infrastructure we need to continue to grow rapidly over the coming years in our quest for net zero. At SP Energy Networks, we recognise the critical role of community energy that it plays in our collective journey towards a sustainable future, and this is why we have committed to providing robust support for community energy groups across our distribution areas. So this year, we've created a new community energy team at SP Energy Networks, where we've got Liam Cantel looking after our SPD licence area and myself in the SP MANWEB licence. Liam's going to go into more detail the work that we've been doing to help the support of the community groups in a couple of minutes. So as Nathan mentioned, this is one of a three-part series of events which we hope you find useful. We're doing these to help you on your journey, so please take away as much as you can from these sessions and please feed back to us anything that you think that is missing. As Nathan mentioned, this evening's session is being recorded and will be made available after the event along with a copy of the slides. So thank you all very much for coming, and I will hand you back over to Nathan.
Thanks, Louise. I'm just conscious of time. I was going to just quickly run through the agenda, but you have all received the agenda in advance, so hopefully it's okay just to move on to the next agenda item. I think that's passing over back to Spen and Liam Cantwell for a presentation on Spen strategy.
Thank you very much, Nathan. And again, just to say thank you to everyone for coming along this evening to this workshop and webinar. I appreciate I have the sun quite a lot in my eyes, so I hope that's not too off-putting. My section here is really to talk through SP Energy Network's community energy strategy, how it's came into development, and what we hope to be doing going forward in supporting community energy stakeholders and affiliated organisations and making sure that we can help to improve this sector and also adequately support it. So to give a bit of kind of high-level insight into why we have decided to support community energy and what our thinking behind that is, I think it's important to see how we are able to implement these changes and what helps our governments. On a top level, you have the government who sets the overall energy policy and objectives. This is then regulated by Ofgem, who regulate the energy market. SP Energy Networks is one of these DNOs, and off the back of the compliance that's put through, we develop our comprehensive business plan, ED2, outlining how we will manage and improve the electrical distribution network over the 5-year period from 2023 to 2028. The strategy we've developed is 3-pronged and focuses on 3 focal areas: support, awareness and continuous improvement. From a support aspect, our aim is to provide technical advice and support through our dedicated community energy advisors, myself and Louise. From an awareness point of view, our hope is to partner with local organisations to deliver community energy awareness campaigns. And from a continuous improvement point of view, we will be submitting a community energy strategy which is now live on our website, and this will be reviewed annually, ensuring that we are supporting community groups effectively. The strategy itself, as you can see here, is a document that can be found on our site. These slides will be shared later, and the QR code that you can see here gives you access to the different details and content within it. To go into a bit more high-level detail of what the strategy looks like and where the focus areas are, again looking at the 3-pronged approach of support, awareness and continuous improvement. From a support aspect, the main point that we have here is the accessibility to our community energy team with myself and Louise. We've established a dedicated channel of communication with our email address that you can see at the top, communityenergy@spenergynetworks.co.uk. We can also offer help and support with optioneering and guidance, making sure that community energy groups are adequately prepared, have the resources that they need to make sure that these projects are successful, and support in applications that are getting put through. We also offer innovation support, exploring different technologies and funding mechanisms, as well as offering capacity building workshops similar to the one that you are all on tonight. We also have our streamlined support, where all of these resources and guides can be found on our new dedicated website, and once again with the QR code that you can see at the bottom, this can be accessed. Looking at the awareness that we have to offer, our main aim is to ensure that we're keeping our stakeholders informed of the different resources and industry developments. This is why we have sponsored the State of the Sector report for community energy this year and are hoping to use the information from this to help steer our movements going forward. From a collaboration point of view, we are working with the community energy representative bodies in Scotland, England and Wales to make sure that the support that we are offering and the awareness that we are driving is effective and useful. And through the multi-channel engagements that we have on social media, print, and through a range of communication tools, we are making sure that any of these updates and insights into the sector are effectively put across. And again, through active participation, our hope is that with similar webinars and workshops similar to this one that you have today, we can help to continue to support and raise awareness of the community energy sector. Lastly, looking at the strategy and how it will develop going forward, as much as we are aiming to offer support from an advocacy point of view, we still need as much detail as possible for where the pain points are, where community energy groups and affiliated bodies and organisations need their own support and perhaps need some further support and resource building. This is something that we want to be able to identify and adequately help with. Barrier management, if there are continual barriers that are coming up in the way, we would like to make sure that we can offer as much help and support and effectively coming over them. And as much as this strategy is developed on a yearly basis, it is still a reactive strategy and isn't one that sits stagnated in this shared journey that we go on together in community energy. Of the different points that I've highlighted today, again, I'll make reference to the community energy webpage that we have as a centralised hub. If you register as a stakeholder, you can get regular updates. Again, this can be accessed through the QR code here. And to have an in-depth look at our community energy strategy, once again, you have the QR code at the end. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar for this afternoon. Thanks, Nathan.
Just very quickly, we are Community Energy Wales and the Cymunedol Cymru. We are a Welsh government-funded, fully bilingual membership organisation representing the interests of community energy organisations in Wales. So we'll be sort of fighting for you, if you like. This is the team. Don't particularly need to go through everyone, just there's me in the bottom right hand corner there, research and policy. So as I said, we're really fighting for community energy organisations' interests here in Wales. I deal with the organisations themselves and Welsh Government. We are around 60 members currently and always looking to support more members across Wales as well. Around 75% of our members are community organisations. We also have corporate members and some associates. So we work together with some other agencies as well. We do have these groups. We provide support for community energy organisations as they are starting to get up and running, but also once they're running as well, representing their interests. This is what we do, basically just leading by example, sharing our knowledge and our wisdom. So putting people in touch as well with others that are already here up and running in Wales and trying to, as I said, get that influence on Welsh Government. As we mentioned, or as Liam mentioned earlier, we have been working together with Community Energy England and Scotland on putting together the State of the Sector report. We also write our own State of the Sector report for Wales, and you can read last year's there if you want to find out more. But this year, as I said, we are very kindly sponsored by Scottish Power Energy Networks as well to get the details for this year. So that's basically our organisation. If you are in Wales or your organisation is in Wales, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and hopefully be able to provide some support for you as well. That's me done. Thank you very much, everyone. Diolch yn fawr.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jason.
Yes, hi everyone. John Taylor here from Community Energy England. Okay, right, if you move forward one slide, please. Okay, right. Good evening, everybody. I'm John Taylor. I'm the Head of Capacity Building and Strategic Development at Community Energy England. I think given the breadth of the area covered by Scottish Power Energy Networks, I believe certainly the patch in England is around Liverpool, Cheshire, the Wirral area. But we certainly do collaborate very well with our partners in Community Energy Wales and Scotland as well. So a little bit about us. We've been going since 2014 as the membership body in England, representing over 300 organisations involved with all aspects of the energy transition, from large generation projects to innovation through to fuel poverty work and energy advice. Next slide, please. Yes, so our broad mission is to help the sector thrive as much as possible and scale up, especially with the changing government and the talk around their energy ambition for the local power plan and GB Energy. 8 gigawatts of capacity is the national target now for local ownership of generation capacity. So we're very excited to play a role as part of that, and working with the connection networks, DNOs, distribution networks, transmission. It's all going to be everybody pulling in the same direction to make that happen. The bit of national work we're leading is on the Energy Learning Network, along with Ashton Centre for Sustainable Energy. It's going to be a capacity building programme, organising a training programme, curating events, both virtual and in person, to share viable business models, how to be more effective social enterprises and professional partners working alongside local authorities and other commercial partners in the energy system. And it's not limited to these as well. It's a 3.5-year-long programme, so we're just right at the beginning of it. So please feed back to your national member bodies about what you'd like to see this network deliver for you as well. Next, please. One aspect, we've got a kind of heat and retrofit coordinator who's leading some very interesting work around net zero terrace streets, how to decarbonise this particular niche of our communities. Not very suitable for air source heat pumps, not big enough for big heat networks, but very interesting opportunity to integrate ground source heat pumps, rooftop solar PV, energy storage. There's a very interesting smart local energy system trial being pioneered here in Rosendale in Lancashire, which we're running in an awareness and sharing event later this month to hopefully replicate this model to other parts of the country. Next slide, please. And that's it. As a member, you get access to lots of resources. Like we run monthly newsletters, links with governments to influence policy. And yeah, we've been running regional conferences as well. In the Midlands was our most recent one in Birmingham. I think we've also got our Community Energy Awards to celebrate best practice and success across the sector as well. Very much keen to raise awareness about community energy, get people excited about it as a delivery route. I'll skip forward this because I want to see the rest of the content later about wind farms and hydropower. Big thing we've got coming up this month is our Members Award Night in Bristol, as well as our Southwest Regional Forum. I'm going to be in Bristol on the same day, the 22nd of November. You don't have to be a group in the southwest of England to attend that. Welsh partners, people from the northwest and Midlands also welcome to join us as well. Scotland too, if you want to travel. But do look that up if you're interested in seeing what's out there at the moment. That's it.
Thanks very much, John. So shall we move to Community Energy Scotland and the presentation on wind turbine technology?
Yeah.
Hi, Jack.
Hiya. So I'm Jack from Community Energy Scotland. I'm an assistant technical officer. Recently joined the technical team here. So my role is sort of help with any technical aspects that require support across a range of projects. So far, I've helped with sort of yield analysis for proposed energy generation technologies for a community group, looking into like sort of solar and wind as well. I've also been doing a bit of data collection for various projects, and I've also recently started supporting aspects of the Rural Energy Hubs project, which is based up in Orkney. So today I'm just sort of going to give a brief intro into CES and quickly take you through what sort of what a community group might need to consider when looking into getting a turbine, what sort of turbines are available at the moment, and also have a look at what community groups currently have installed as well. So could I have the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, wait, that might have skipped one. Sorry.
Okay, let me see.
Oh, right. Sorry. So we're a member-led independent organisation whose aims are to increase energy independence in communities and help them to reduce their carbon emissions. We promote and support community-led projects through practical and technical support, and we help communities to build their understanding, build their capacity to create more democratic, sustainable and low-carbon solutions. One way we do this is by enabling our members to link up and network with each other, allowing them to share their knowledge, learn off each other's successes and failures. If you're an organisation in Scotland and are interested, definitely, if you want to become a member, look into that. You can either go to our website or I can maybe put my email address in the chat afterwards and you can email me if you want to find out more. So next slide, please. So yeah, I think it's just a nice example of a project that CES has supported. It was a while ago now. In 2009, it was completed, the Westray turbine in Orkney. So I think it just sort of ties in nicely with what I'm going to talk about today. So due to the nature of the location, there were lots of barriers and question marks around surrounding this project. CES played a role in finding solutions to these barriers. For example, one was finding a suitable turbine and convincing the developer that it was worth coming all the way up to Orkney to install it. So this project was a success, and it inspired and informed many other similar projects in the surrounding areas that have all benefited their respective communities greatly. There are many things that need to be considered when choosing a wind turbine. Firstly, wind resource, how windy is the site, how durable does your turbine need to be? Another thing that needs to be considered is your grid connection. Reinforcing the grid and being able to cope with large wind turbine can be very expensive. So that's something that needs to be considered. Obviously, the cost of the turbine itself as well is obviously very important, especially with regards to payback time for a turbine. For communities, the revenue stream created by turbines often increases once the initial loan's been paid off, and I'll sort of give an example of that later as well. The impact that a turbine has in the surrounding area often dictates what size of turbine is suitable for a given project. If there's housing nearby, then the noise levels of a particular turbine may need to be considered, and even just the general, the height of a turbine as well, if it's really close to housing. And lastly, another thing that's important is making sure you have someone that's able to maintain your turbine for you. If you don't have someone who can do that, then you're going to have troubles down the line, and that's sort of a consideration that's mostly relevant to situations when you're looking at second-hand turbines, which I'll also have sort of an example of later as well. So if I can have the next slide. And I just really briefly wanted to mention wind classes, just for a bit of context. Basically, for anyone that doesn't know them, they basically just represent the different average wind speeds. There's a couple other parameters as well, such as turbulence and gust speed and things like that. But essentially, not all turbines will be rated for all of the wind classes. And going back to when I mentioned wind resource as a factor that needs to be considered, obviously you need to make sure that your wind turbine can withstand the winds it's going to be exposed to. In Scotland, you're mostly looking at classes 1 and 2, and in sort of coastal areas and higher altitude areas, you're looking at mostly class 1. So that was just for a little bit of extra context for going forward. And if I could have the next slide, please. So sort of with that in mind, I'd like to show a little piece of sort of data collection that I sort of did recently. They just show what sort of turbines are available from the sort of main manufacturers right now. This figure sort of shows capacity against tip height for turbines up to 200 meter tip height. And this is only for class 1 and 2 turbines, as I was looking at sort of Scotland. What we see at the moment is that both capacity and height of turbines is increasing when compared to what sort of community groups have currently. So another key point is that only 7 of these models, and if we go to the next slide, are class 1 rated. So this sort of shows the same thing, but for class 1 turbines. And obviously, certain areas of Scotland, you need to have class 1, and as you can see, the choice is fairly limited at the moment. This is also quite important when looking at groups that already have turbines that want to repower them. If you look at turbines that are 100 kilowatts or higher, community-owned turbines, there's about 56 of them, I believe, in Scotland at the moment. And of those 56, around 20 of them are the same model. It's a class 1 Enercon turbine that's 900 kilowatts. And as you can see from this graph, there's sort of only one model that's available at 3 different tip heights. It's an EWT turbine that's sort of suited to that. And so as you can see, there is quite a limited choice at the moment if you're looking at class 1. Of course, there are areas where you can get away with class 2, and so it's not all sort of doom and gloom. But I will sort of show now on the next slide the same sort of figure, but for what communities currently have in Scotland. And as you can see, there are a lot more clustered down on that very left-hand side below 1 megawatt, and not many communities have any that are, on the larger side of things. So I mentioned the 56 sort of turbines that are larger than 100 kilowatt. That's sort of what you see here. And the models for these turbines, only 43 of them, those models are still, only the models for 43 of those turbines are still currently available. Which means that going forward, communities are going to need to look for different solutions if they want to acquire large-scale turbines. And although, as I've shown, that the choice of turbine now is more limited, especially considering class 1 turbines, and the turbines are increasing in size, communities are still showing they can make it work. And I'm going to give a few examples of that now. So if we go to the next slide again. First example is an example of refurbished turbines. So it's a long time ago now, but the Isle of Gia Heritage Trust, they got 3 refurbished Vestas turbines. They're 225 kilowatts each. They're now in their 20th year of operation, and it is a solution. Some of the companies I mentioned or that were on the figures earlier, for example, Vestas, still do offer maintenance on refurbished turbines. It is, however, on specific models, but it's just sort of to show that that is an option and that a community group in the past has made it work. So even though if you're looking at sort of current models of turbine, even if it's quite limited in choice, you can still possibly make it work using older turbines. Another example on the next slide is Point and Sandwich Trust. They own the largest community-owned wind farm in the UK with 3 megawatt Enercon turbines. The turbines generate £900,000 annually for the community. And as I mentioned earlier, once initial loans are paid off, that goes up and it's expected to increase to about £2 million per year for this community. It's a really good example that show that communities can scale up alongside the sort of scaling of the market at the moment. And so, yeah, it's just a really good example to show that it is still possible and that communities are able to acquire these really large turbines. Those 3 megawatt turbines are the largest in terms of capacity that any community group in Scotland has. And if onto the next slide, I've got one last example. Radio City Association in Kilbirnie in North Ayrshire. So they are almost completed. They've almost completed their 2.5 megawatt turbine. It's going to be the first community-owned subsidiary-free turbine in the UK. It has a rotor diameter of 82 metres and a tip height of 110 metres, which makes it one of the largest community-owned turbines in Scotland. Well, that'll be when it's up and running. It's expected to be complete around the end of this year, maybe into January 2025. So basically, it's just a really good example that shows even though the options are more limited now and turbines are getting larger, communities are still able to find solutions for their projects. So yeah, despite the increase, it's not impossible for communities to find a solution. And yeah, that's sort of me.
Thanks very much, Jack. So swiftly moving back into the agenda, I think we do have Joe from Ricardo now.
Thank you very much. So my name is Joe. I work as a consultant here at Ricardo. We work, our aim is to create a sustainable and safe world. And we do that with a lot of clients in, for example, the energy sector. So we might work with people like yourselves at a community building level. We also work with people like SPEN in terms of planning networks. And we do planning and implementation of energy generation as well in terms of PV and wind farms and so on and so forth. So this evening I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing as some trends, some details of technologies. Some of them are well established, some a bit less so, but they're the sorts of things that I expect that you might be considering for your projects. So I'll get into it. And when we're talking about community energy, what might that encompass? Well, it might be as simple as a single EV charger, which is pretty small scale. It might be that you're thinking of a community hall and putting some sort of generation on there, and you might have various reasons for that, as we'll come to. We talk about something a bit bigger in terms of a village scale and supplying energy. In the case of this picture, we're looking at district heating. And it might be that we're actually looking to create an energy generator, which, from the point of view of a community group, would be a cash generator, I suppose. So across all scales, there are lots of different things that you could be doing for your community group. Before going into the technologies, I want to take a little step back though and say, when you're choosing those technologies or thinking about which path to go down, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing it, I suppose. And what we find when we talk to various different people is that those groups who know precisely why they're doing something as opposed to what they're doing really make it easier for themselves to do what they're doing, if that makes sense. If you know what your end goal is, which might be, for example, reducing your running costs by generating your own energy, it might be about reducing your energy bills and people within your community, the homes of those people. It might be about trying to just generate some cash to use for something else. It may not be that energy is your key focus, but some other project is. Or it could be that you want your community to decide that you will take some action and some responsibility for helping the country and the world achieve net zero. Or there might be some other things like helping people to transition to EVs if that's difficult in your particular area. Maybe there's a lack of off-street parking for people to install their own chargers. Or it might be that you want to showcase some technologies which you think local community residents might want to employ in their own homes. So lots of different reasons. This is not an exhaustive list, obviously, but if you know that, then it helps you to get to the point of saying, well, what technology will be the right thing, and how will we measure the quality of that technology that we apply? Not quality in terms of how it works, but how it fits in terms of meeting our sort of success factors for our project. So I've laboured that point a little bit because I think it's really important that people do think about that before they get onto technology choices and whatnot, because that will make the project much smoother. But I'm going to go on and talk about a few examples of different things that we've been looking at recently and how they might impact on what you might want to do. And in those examples, I'll highlight some of the regulations that you might have to deal with. So in the case of this public EV charger, there are things like the charge point regulations. And there might be some regulations from the local authority about who can create parking spaces and chargers in different locations. I'll also try and talk a little bit about technologies. So that might be the charger type that you're using in this instance. And generally talk about how those things come together in a project. So if we look at this example, a car charger is a pretty simple thing. You have an electricity connection, in this case coming from the grid. You have a device which you can plug into your car, which has a meter and some kind of connection to the internet, usually, so that you can take payment. And then, of course, you can drive your car up to that and plug in to connect it. So that's quite a common thing for community groups to want to do, because in certain locations it can make life a lot easier for community residents to be able to switch to EVs. But as I say, there are certain things that you need to think about. For example, the charge point regulations put a lot of burden on an operator of an EV charger to store data correctly, for example, to process payments correctly, to deliver a certain resilience. So the charger, if you've put it there and you're selling it as a service, it has to work 99.999% of the time, so to speak. So there's a lot of things in there that you might not consider at first glance, but for example, a third-party operator could cover all those things because they have systems set up to do it. So there are regulatory requirements which have an impact on how your model of delivering this project to your community might work. And of course, there's the varying levels of burden on yourselves in terms of how you manage it and how you get others in to help you effectively. And of course, there are questions to ask about pricing. So you could price this at a non-profit sort of level in terms of what you sell your electricity to for the car owners, what they pay you for it, versus what you pay the network, your supplier. So lots of different things to consider in what is in principle quite a simple technology. Then if we look at the next on my little list here, which is not an exhaustive list, it's just some cherry-picked items. This is maybe more common recently, at least for community groups, that you have a community hall, a sports facility, or a music venue, or whatever it may be, and you want to generate some income, let's say, or you want to reduce your reliance on the grid. And then you might choose to go down the route of some building integrated generation. That might be a small wind turbine, or in this case, it's solar photovoltaics. Again, there's regulatory impact. You've got planning permission, perhaps, on a particular building, depending on when you're located. And then you've got the technology to grapple with as well, which might be the PV, the inverter, which converts your DC electricity into AC and connects it to the grid's frequency. You might choose to have a battery in there if you want to iron out differences between the time of use in terms of your consumption and the time of generation. So a lot of community buildings are used in the evening, but of course the sun is shining during the day. So a battery can help to link those two together. And of course, at our meter, I'm indicating what we're calling the tariff structure, which again might relate to, it's kind of an agile tariff, I suppose is the phrase I'm looking for, that you want to be able to, if you're selling electricity, as in you're generating more and you're using it at a particular time of the day, you want to get a good price for it. And when you're buying electricity, for example, at night, you want to get as cheap as possible. So tariff structures are really important, and I highlight it because when you come to putting together a project like this, you do the obvious things of getting prices for all these different elements, and you try and project into the future as to what you might generate, what you might sell, what you might therefore not have to import, etc., to make your financial model stack up. And that financial model depends quite a lot on what the sun might do, obviously, but it also depends even more largely on what your tariff structure is. So that's something that you need to think about quite early on in planning these things, because it might be the difference between installing a very small system which just covers your own consumption or is at least optimized to match your consumption, or it might be that you max out and cover every square inch of your roof because you see an opportunity to make money. So there's definitely a lot to think about beyond just the technology itself. But I suppose if I touch on that technology for a moment, PVs nowadays are reasonably efficient. Don't forget your building warrant. Yes, thank you for that one. Very good point. You may have to have a building warrant, again, depending on what works you're carrying out. And as I've noted here, you've got a roof structure which potentially, depending on what sort of scale of installation you're putting up there, may need checked out by a structural engineer. And of course, if you need to do any amendments to strengthen that roof structure, then that's definitely one for a building warrant, for example. So on technology, your PVs are fairly simple. You'll know what they look like. You've seen them 100 times on different roofs. But within the building, you're going to have an inverter or multiple inverters, depending on the size of your array. So that needs a little bit of space. And if you do go for a battery, then you've got to think about space for that, although they're generally getting smaller. So again, fairly simple technology now, well established, and you should be able to find lots of installers who can quote you for the work, but also you should be able to find a lot of specialists who can give you good advice. And other people can give you advice. I'll come back to this at the end, but it's really important that you speak to other community groups who've done something similar, actually. So that's the second step in our scale. If I go along a further one, it gets more complicated. So this looks, in principle, similar, that we've got PVs on a roof. But in this case, we've got a building which might be a block of flats, for example, where you have multiple residents, and you want to get together as a community group to put some PV on that roof and then somehow share the benefit. So technology-wise, it's quite simple to generate electricity. It's quite simple to export it as well. But what we found recently when studying the complexity of sharing benefit is that it is a very complex subject. And it's I've sort of described it here as philosophical as much as a technical challenge. And the reason for that is because you need to think in advance as to what you consider benefit to be and how best to share it. So if I sort of exemplify a potential difficulty, it is that if you were to, let's say, generate electricity, export it to the grid, and then you share the value of that electricity by reducing the bills of the people who are in that house or in that block of flats, you can imagine that people who are resident as home workers during the day will be able to use the benefit of that electricity that's being generated, whereas someone who works in an office somewhere else or are not at home working during the day, they don't get the benefit directly of that. So you have to figure out a way of, well, how do we reduce each person's bills, or how do we equalize each person's income to make it even, depending on, irrespective of whether you're using the electricity that's generated at the time or not. And there are technological ways of doing that. There are some clever systems out there that could do it, but they're not cheap. And then there are some alternative billing ways to do it, which again can be complicated by the fact that different residents at the start of this project would have different agreements with different suppliers, therefore are operating on different tariffs and would expect a different sort of benefit, if you like. So we researched this recently on behalf of someone else. We didn't actually come to a single concrete conclusion, if that makes sense. There's not one answer that solves all of these problems, but it's more a question of what do the people want to do, how much money do they have to spend, etc., etc. So a very complicated one for what seems like quite a simple a simple community project where you're kind of banding together and trying to make things a bit better for everybody, it can be complicated by some of these issues, which would obviously slow things down. But again, it goes back to the original questions that I posed, which are, why are you doing this? If you're clear about your end goals, then you can navigate your way through this philosophy a bit easier. And then another scale here is something that we're seeing quite a lot, actually, in recent times, where community groups or parish councils, whoever it may be, are getting the idea, which is interesting, a noble idea, of generating electricity within their area, using that electricity to generate heat, and then pumping that heat around to heat everybody's building. So it's a way of dealing with the fact, and I particularly highlight villages here because many of these communities, there are buildings of a variety of ages, with a variety of complexities when it comes to decarbonising. So the obvious decarbonisation opportunity is take out your oil boiler, replace it with a heat pump. And it may be in, for example, a conservation village that putting a heat pump outside your house is frowned upon or difficult to do. Or it might be that you live in a listed building, listed property, where you can't do anything to improve things like U values, that's insulation of the property, which makes it a bit more difficult for heat pumps to operate at an economic rate. So this idea of creating a heat network and sharing heat from a central source around the whole village seems like a good solution for dealing with that. Of course, you're probably more used to see heat networks in city centres where there's a high density of heat demand, and so the cost of that network per person, so to speak, is fairly low, and that's going to be higher in a community or a rural setting like a village. But perhaps there's ways of making that work if you're generating your own electricity, be it a solar farm or a wind farm, using that electricity to operate a heat pump, be it an air source heat pump or a ground source heat pump, and then distributing that heat, potentially, as in this diagram, through a thermal store, which effectively means you've got a giant battery on site. If you're generating lots of electricity when the sun is shining, you can save that heat in a store for use later on. So there's a lot of complexity in a project of that scale. You can imagine there's more than just a bit of planning permission for your building. There's permission for digging up the streets in your village, for example. There's obviously legislation associated with heat networks. There's legislation associated with billing your customers and making sure you're metering them correctly. There's the planning permission associated with something as large as a solar farm. So these projects are big and complicated. They're not necessarily scary, but they're the sort of things, obviously, that you have to get the appropriate help for at the appropriate time in order that you can properly understand what might the ultimate price per kilowatt hour of heat to your customers be, because that's kind of the benchmark against which they will choose to join that network or not. But this also sort of highlights an opportunity to do something which is not really well established, but it's conceptually well thought of, which is something called a microgrid. So effectively, that is like creating a small island in your community where you have a single connection to the outside electricity network. You have your own network around that island, and you can sort of lift the drawbridge, so to speak, when you want to or need to. But also your supplier, your network, could lift that drawbridge when they need to sort of cut you off and reduce the load on their network. So to do that, you obviously need some form of generation, like in this instance PVs, and you need some form of storage to keep you going just in case that generation isn't happening, because, of course, renewables of this nature are dependent on the weather. So that storage might be a thermal store, it might be electric batteries. But either way, if you've created that island and you have your generation and you have your storage, then it all comes down to what is the tariff that you can get agreed with your network supplier. So that could be very advantageous pricing structure for you if that's if the network is really keen to be able to kind of raise that drawbridge and take you out of the picture when they're having their peaks. And if that is a very advantageous tariff structure, then that makes ultimately the price of heat to all these customers comes down. So it becomes quite a complex technical project because there's very many elements to it. But it's also, importantly, a complex financial project. You'll need to get the right advice and support from the right places to navigate your way through that. But yeah, it's an interesting and more common route that people are at least investigating, even if they're not successfully going to complete the project. They're definitely looking at it more and more often. So I raise that one as something some of you may be thinking about just now. In terms of the technology, we've talked a little about PVs here. Heat pumps, I'll just sort of a quick reminder of what they are. That they're devices, refrigeration devices, effectively, which take heat energy from a source and deposit that energy in a different place, like the pipes of your heating network. So a heat pump could use heat from the air, or it could use heat from the ground, or it could use heat from a water source if that water source is flowing. And it's common that any or all of those might be combined actually in a system as large as this. What I would say though is that it's common knowledge, if you like, in inverted commas, that ground source heat pumps are better than air source heat pumps because they're marginally more efficient. But bear in mind that air source heat pumps are considerably cheaper. So again, another financial aspect to consider when you're thinking about capital cost versus your lifetime cost of the project. So that was a pretty quick run through of various technologies. My last point here was to say, where can you get advice? And of course, this would have been a good segue into the following presentations, but you've obviously had a bit of a head start on some of them anyway. But of course, there are these organisations out here, and you'll hear more from them in this meeting. But of course, don't be shy about talking to suppliers and installers to get their advice when you're planning these things. Look for consultants, engineering consultants, when you have, when you've got your concrete idea of what you want and you're a bit uncertain about the technical details, then make use of those professionals. And as I alluded to at the beginning of this, we recently did some research on sort of success factors of different projects. And one of those pieces of advice from people who have completed projects in the past was go and speak to other people who have completed projects in the past. So your fellow community groups, if you know someone who has completed a project of whatever scale, then speak to them and find out their experience, find out what they found the most difficult aspect of it, which may not be what a consultant thinks is the most difficult aspect, and sort of prepare yourselves by investigating those factors. And I think that's all I wanted to say, and I think that's about 20 minutes, so hopefully on track. I'll hand back to you, Nathan, and if there are any questions, obviously we can pick them up in the chat or later on.
Great, thanks very much, Joe. And like Joe said, if you've got any questions on any of those technologies, you can ask Joe and the other panel members later on, and you can discuss them in the breakout sessions shortly. So I'll just move on now to the two case study presentations. It's the Edinburgh Community Solar Co-op.
Okay. My name is Jim Lee, and I actually work for Energy for All, who are... Can I take control of this? No? Yeah. I work for Energy for All, a not-for-profit organisation that supports Edinburgh Solar and 35 other projects across the UK, 15 of them in Scotland. I'm a director of the Edinburgh Solar Co-op, so I'm speaking on their behalf. Perhaps the most interesting thing about the Edinburgh Solar Co-op is the journey that they had to the point where they established the project. I started working for Energy for All in 2016, and at that point they tell me they had been talking about the project for about 10 years. They had looked at various options. They had started off in a very ambitious way. Their initial idea was to create a community-owned wind farm in Leith Harbour, and they worked for some time trying to develop that idea before realising that it wasn't practical in the urban setting in which they wished to do it. They then went in the opposite direction and looked at one very small project, a starting point, a community centre that had been through community asset transfer, but for various reasons that didn't work out for them either. And they tell me they were almost about to give up when they found themselves almost by chance in discussion with the Edinburgh Council about how they might develop a project, and they have been working with them from 2015. They have done 2 community share offers, one actually towards the end of 2015 rather than 2016 as it says in the slide, although the work was done in 2016, so we tend to associate 2016 with the first phase of the project. And the second community share offer done in 2020, raising over £2 million. The first share offer was a bigger one, 1.4 million. The second one, £660,000. It would have been a bigger project, but it was during COVID, and a combination of COVID and various grid problems within Edinburgh reduced it in size. And the Edinburgh Solar Co-op are very proud to say that they raised nearly all the money from Edinburgh itself. They only managed to raise 70% of the money in 2015. That was because they're up against a couple of deadlines. One was a feed-in tariff deadline. The other one, the EIS tax exemption running out. So they decided to offer shares to people outside Edinburgh, but they still managed to raise 70% of the money in Edinburgh. And in 2020, they raised every penny within Edinburgh. This means they have installed solar panels on the roofs of 30 council buildings across Edinburgh. Most of them primary schools, quite a few leisure centres. And they'd be very proud to say that the citizens of Edinburgh, have paid for solar panels on the roofs of council buildings. They are also able to supply electricity to the council below grid price at fixed rates, which means at the moment on 24 buildings, the council is paying 2015 prices, and on the other 6, 2020 prices, albeit the second phase was index linked. They look after all their operation and maintenance, and all the financial surplus goes to community benefit. So if they make 20,000, 30,000 profit a year, they then invite applications for that from across the city, hand out grants of £2,000-3,000 to community groups and other of the like across Edinburgh. They have now agreed a third phase of 16 buildings. That was agreed by the council only 2 weeks ago. They are planning to do a £2.6 million community share offer in early 2025. And some of the buildings involved this time reflect the ambition of the Solar Co-op. They are including the Royal Commonwealth Pool and the International Climbing Centre. And they are also, for the first time, as it were, stepping outside the council. So they are going to include some community-owned properties. That will include a couple of community asset transferred community centres, a charity-owned childcare facility, and a food poverty project that leases a building from the council. Reasons why the project has been successful. First of all, because the council itself had actually been using the label Cooperative Council 8-10 years ago. They were looking for projects like this and found one. So it was a good match. That said, there were all sorts of problems in terms of making the project work, not least of them procurement, but just getting people across the council to all come to the same place, whether it was finance or legal or estates or whatever, took a bit of work. And it was only leadership at the highest level, the chief exec and the council leader, stepping into the project that really made it happen in the way that it did. It's also worth saying that the project, because it didn't use the usual rules of procurement, were presenting themselves as citizens of Edinburgh who were using certain values and principles, cooperative values and principles like equality, democracy, solidarity, and the likes. and through that they were able to work in partnership with the council. So though it is a business relationship, it is very much a partnership business relationship. And it also has to be said that the council has shown great faith in the community. It trusts the community, and it takes quite a lot of courage on behalf of entities within the public sector to trust the community to deliver on something that perhaps it itself would normally have delivered. And the final point I would make is that Energy for All has helped with this project as well. We are only funded by the community groups who are actually up and operating. So for about 5 of those 10 years, we worked free of charge with the Solar Co-op to develop it. We are funded by the wind projects that we had established before that. And now that Edinburgh has been up and running for 8 years, it is supporting us while we develop other projects. So very much a partnership that has led to a success. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jim, on sensing on that. Fantastically successful initiative. Now I'll pass over to Wallace George from the Ogwen.
Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. If you don't mind, Nathan, would you manage moving the slides for me?
Yeah, I'll try to.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to switch off my camera purely because my notes are on a separate screen to my right, and this side isn't my best profile. So if that's okay. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Just to confirm, first of all, Yn Ogwen translates quite simply as Ogwen Energy. We're based in Dyffryn Ogwen, the Ogwen Valley, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a moment. Picking up on Jack's point earlier in terms of why has this initiative come about. Fundamentally, it's because we were initially established by a community development organisation called Partneriaeth Ogwen, which is formed by 3 community councils coming together to pool their resources to stimulate various economic and social projects in the area. So sustainability of the community, achieving net zero was central to that, but also quite fundamentally the ownership of natural resources for community benefit, including wealth creation and retention. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is Afon Ogwen, the River Ogwen, which flows through our valley. We are located to the south of Bangor in Gwynedd in northwest Wales. The valley is bordered on one side by the Glyderau mountain range and on the other by the Carneddau. The upper valley is part of Eryri National Park, an area you probably know as Snowdonia. And historically, the community here was very dependent on the slate industry and has suffered tremendously from its decline from the 1960s onwards. At its peak, the beginning of the last century, over 20,000 people lived here, but this is now reduced to around 6,500. The Welsh language is very much a living community language, with roughly 3/4 of the local population able to speak the language. But also, according to the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, all the wards in the valley are amongst the poorest 10% in Wales. The area is now very heavily dependent on the visitor economy, and like many others, has seen a proliferation of short-term holiday lets, Airbnb and the like, in recent years. Can I move on, please? So here we have Afon Ogwen. This is the weir, which is constructed in 2016. Just behind it, you will see Pont Ogwen, the Ogwen Bridge, which is quite a well-known local landmark. And interestingly, just beyond the bridge on the upper side of the river, there is a site of a hydro which was developed by the local quarry over a century ago to provide them with power. So this is the low intake weir beneath the bridge. From here, there's a 10-metre outlet pipe that goes into a small header tank. And if we can have the next slide, please, Nathan. And then the water travels roughly 316 metres down this pipeline, which you'd be pleased to know is now buried, to the turbine house, which you can see on the slide. And beyond that, an outflow pipe returns the water to the river. Next slide, please. And here we are inside the turbine house. The handsome gentleman in the high-vis jacket is Gareth Kemlin-Jones, who is our chair, and we're very, very lucky to have his services because he has spent a lifetime working in the hydro industry across the world, developing some very significant, huge hydro projects. And this is where the magic happens. You see the intake pipe on the right-hand side there, the generator just to the left, and then from here, the electricity that's created goes up to a pole-mounted transformer, literally just above the turbine house, which is then converted into the electricity exported as a high voltage. Next slide, please. So why hydro is one of the questions I was asked to consider. Well, as I hope you've seen, the Afon Ogwen is very much at the heart of the valley. So it was immediately obvious to the founders of our organisation that they should be looking at the potential for that in terms of energy generation. There are also other hydros in the area, one developed by the National Trust and a couple of others in private ownership. And Gareth Kemlin, if he was here, would emphasise it's obviously a proven technology and highly efficient in terms of output. Just to note, the capacity is 100 kilowatts. The initial ambitions were actually to install a generator for 500 kilowatts, but had to be reduced following negotiations about the abstraction licence, unfortunately. The development costs of nearly £500,000 were all funded by a community share offer, and as with Edinburgh, the vast majority of that funding was raised within the local community. We have been fortunate that the scheme started generating in 2017 and were able to access the feed-in tariff, which certainly made the initial business case a far more economically viable option. Next slide, please. So in terms of outputs, the generator is predicted to produce approximately 500 megawatt hours of clean electricity each year and save around 150 tonnes of carbon. Next slide, please. And if I remind you that obviously the initial imperative here was as much about wealth creation as it was about carbon reduction, I'm glad to say we have been very successful in generating benefits. We have set up a totally independent separate charity called Listen Ogwen, and we provide funding to that charity on an annual basis. And for this financial year and the previous year, that has been £15,000. And to date, they've awarded grants in the region of 54,000, which we're very, very proud of. Next slide, please. And then this beauty is a 16-seater electric minibus, which we funded in March of this year for use primarily by the local secondary school and primary school. And it's actually managed as part of Partneriaeth Ogwen's community transport service. Next slide, please. So again, since 2020, attention has turned to the potential for solar PV installations. And again, picking up on Jack's query as to why solar, fundamentally because the overall vision for any Ogwen is to be able to supply energy directly to local households and into the local markets. So initially, the focus has been on providing affordable clean energy to community buildings and SMEs, and then we entered into a power purchase agreement with the occupants of those buildings. We use local accredited contractors, and in that initial phase in 2020, we did actually install on 6 sites with a total capacity of 21 kilowatts. And I should emphasise, at that time, the organisation had no staff of its own, so all this activity was delivered by the volunteer directors. Next slide, please. So here we have Caban Cysgu Gerlan, which is a community-owned bunkhouse in the village of Gerlan on the upper slopes of the valley. And this is a very small 1 kilowatt scheme. And we're actually in discussions with them at the moment in terms of adding to the installation that's already there. Next slide, please. And this is Bethesda Rugby Club, the new clubhouse back in 2020, where we installed a 4 kilowatt system. Next slide, please. Jim mentioned that the impact of COVID earlier, and that was certainly the case in terms of any Ogwen's ability to carry forward the work around hydro. But we're very grateful to Welsh Government for making a grant fund available, the Community Energy Resources Grant, which we have been successful in securing funding for my post for 2 years, and I shared the post with my colleague David Meirig. And our target for the 2-year funding period is to produce a further 600 kilowatts of generation capacity, both roof-mounted and ground-mounted. Next slide, please. So, to date, our total capacity has reached 115 kilowatts. That's on a total of 8 sites with an investment of £132,000. And I should note that all of the funding for these installations to date has come from the profits generated by the hydro scheme, in addition to the community benefits that I indicated earlier. We've completed 5 installations in this year. 3 of those were extensions to some of the schemes completed back in 2020, along with 2 new sites. And we're currently actively working on another 6 sites, which should produce roughly 68 kilowatts to add to that 115. Next slide, please. So here we are back at the rugby club, where an additional 9 kilowatts were installed in March, bringing their total generation capacity up to 13. Next slide, please. And this is Canolfan Cefnfaes, the Cefnfaes Centre, which you may work out from the building's appearance. A long time ago, used to be a local grammar school. It was then a community centre operated by the local authority. But over a couple of years now, it's actually been repurposed and managed by Partneriaeth Ogwen, the local community development organisation. And within it, they have some of their own staff located there. There are community spaces, there's a co-working area, and on the lower ground floor, there are a number of workshops which are let out at a reasonable rent. The site is also the base for charging their fleet of 4 community transport vehicles as well. So energy consumption is quite significant. And we've installed a 39 kilowatt system here in May of this year, which is proven to be very, very successful to date. Next slide, please. And this is the roof of the Cefnfaes Centre. So in total, 91 panels at a cost of £53,000. And in addition to that, Partneriaeth Ogwen themselves invested in a 64 kilowatt-hour battery storage system, which obviously enables them to maximise the generation, particularly in terms of charging their fleet of electric vehicles overnight. Next slide, please. And just to give you a flavour, as Jack and I think Jim also mentioned, our talking and engaging with other organisations. The organisation at that first bullet point, Ynni Afon, is in an adjoining valley to the east of us, and they have been generating very significant hydro since 2015, and we certainly benefited greatly from their experiences. Ynni Padan Peris there in the third bullet point is to the valley to our west, and they've developed their hydro scheme in exactly the same timescale as we have, and we continue to collaborate with them and others whenever possible. And there are just a couple of other schemes which I thought might be of interest to you. Ynni Newydd, which translates as new energy, is a scheme which is projected to produce 30 megawatts in a location called Bretton Hall, which is on the Flintshire and Cheshire border. So it's actually in the 2 countries. They've now had planning consent in both the local authority areas and are looking to issue a share offer later this year. And then Ynni Hiraethog being a moorland area in Denbighshire to the east of us here, where a 60 megawatt wind farm is proposed, where it is intended that there will actually be a shared ownership model between the local community group, Ynni Hiraethog, and the private developer. And they've recently completed their pre-application consultation. So again, that could be very significant as a model to enable communities to gain broader benefits, but also sharing the risk by working closely with an experienced developer. That's really all I have to share with you this evening. I hope that's been of some use or some interest here. Obviously, my contact details are on the next slide, Nathan, if you want to show that now. And again, if anybody wants to follow up, to have any more information about any of our experiences, obviously we're very, very happy to share those with you. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Wallace, great presentation on lots of different case studies for community energy projects across North Wales. Appreciated. Thank you. So the next 15 minutes is a Q&A panel discussion with our panel members. So the panel is Jack Comfort, Technical Officer at Community Energy Scotland, Graham Ayling, Community Renewable Energy Programme Manager, Energy Saving Trust, and Joe Gamwell, Technical Specialist, Ricardo Energy and Environment. So any questions you had from the breakout groups that you want to pose to our panel, please feel free. I'm not sure how the best way to do this, whether it's people raise their hands and then the team can unmute you, or feel free to put questions in the chat.
I can start with kind of a broad one from our group, which probably I imagine would be across the groups, but we had quite a good discussion around community buy-in and just how to really get people on board with these projects, understanding what they're doing, and just having kind of bringing the whole community along with you, which isn't really a question, but I guess just looking for general advice and lots of people talking about how to really build that capacity and make sure it's not just one person leading things, but bringing people along and making sure that everyone feels involved in it. If anybody has experience to speak to on that kind of front.
I can chip in if no one else. This was also an issue that came up in our group. So we had a mix of organisations that are already very immersed in this, but also some who are kind of at an earlier stage in the journey. And there was a lot of discussion about just making sure that there's good information out there, actually spending a bit of time on community engagement. We also had some discussion about the need for kind of common approaches on community engagement by the private sector and the opportunity there for getting kind of shared ownership potentially as part of that community benefit. It's something that our organisation is a bit involved in Scotland. And also some discussion about there are some organisations out there with sort of engagement processes, almost like an off-the-shelf product that can support. So one that was flagged was Centre for Sustainable Energy, their kind of community energy landscapes project, which is something that kind of works on that, getting the community together around a renewable energy project.
Thanks, Graham. Any other questions from any other breakout groups or any observations? Any learning to share?
I think from the first question, the main kind of aspects we were looking at were the challenges surrounding the community energy projects, and I think one of the main things we were getting was the people capacity element and making sure that there was actually professionals within the sector who can help and provide support on a reliable long-term basis rather than the continual kind of voluntary aspect or the part-time element. A couple of other issues that we found around some challenges potentially would be constraints on the grid, of course, having that capacity to take on projects, finding and sourcing correct funding sources, and again, finding the correct individuals. One of the points that Jim had made was that, these projects can sit for so long without any kind of take-up because the right people just haven't found each other to be in the right room to have the conversations to get from step 1 to step 2 through to step 10. And a lot of the time it's not that the process is difficult, it's finding the correct people to point in the right direction can be more difficult than actually seeing it out. So I think from a signposting point of view, a benefit the sector could probably see and would provide a decent amount of help would be that there is a clear pathway of who the individuals are to deal with. But like anything in the age that we live in with the internet and the amount of options, it gets to the point where you have an information overload that can often leave you stifling of, well, where do I go? And then with that overwhelming feeling can often lead to a lack of progress off the back of that. So one of the main things we did say would be finding the right individuals and sharing and communicating the process. Again, this was touched on earlier with some of the case studies. If projects have had success in the past, using this as a kind of shining light or a beacon to inspire others and say, right, okay, well, this is a path that can be trodden, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think that's quite important too. So that was just a quick capture of the kind of first aspect of what our group is looking at. If anyone feels there's anything worth kind of drawing out off the back of that.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Liam just said, we discussed similar things with our group, and indeed, I come from a group that's in the very early stages of a project, and the word signposting is a word that I feel could help us a lot. If there was not necessarily a blueprint, but a clearly mapped out path that we could go along, the whole project might proceed much more quickly. And I guess that's where we're looking at others to give us that sort of help. And would you be able to come up with anything like that? Is there a simple route for most projects to follow, or are they all much more complicated?
I think, something that we tried to do at Community Energy Scotland is exactly kind of like what's been touched on here. It's quite often when one of our members comes to us with a question, quite often it's just like pointing out another member that sort of we already knows the answer and getting them in touch, and that's often enough. So I think, like, I'm sure it's the same for Community Energy Wales and Scotland and England as well. If you're not a member of them, I would definitely look into that, because I think that's one of the sort of best, maybe one of the most useful features is that they, I guess, have a lot of contacts that maybe have at least one of their contacts or one of the groups or one of the members may have been on like a very similar journey to you, and it might be that it's just getting you in contact with one of those groups that's had a similar, or just even, I'd certainly know like colleagues of mine at Community Scotland will have a question come in, and it's just like, oh, we know that this person has worked on a project that was just like that. Let's see what they know. And so I would definitely recommend like becoming a member of one of those organisations. Yeah.
Thank you. Graham, you got your hand up? Thanks, Hayden. Yeah, I think I definitely echo what Jack said. I know Community Energy Wales, England and Scotland have all got kind of good resources to help with that. Also, I mentioned earlier that as Energy Saving Trust, we're involved with the Scottish and Welsh Government's community renewable support programmes, and within the resources for that, certainly in the CARES resources and toolkit, there is a sort of high-level kind of map of what the process might be of developing a community renewables project that kind of breaks it down into stages with the different kinds of things that you need to address at each stage. So that would definitely be worth looking at, and I believe there's a similar version for Wales. Although it's a Scottish Government resource, a lot of the technical side of that is all going to be pretty much the same for England. So, and that will be on the Local Energy Scotland website. We can always follow up with some links to these things if it's helpful, but that might kind of help you understand what's there. And yeah, John's probably going to come in at the minute, because I know there's some really good resources on the Community Energy England site as well. Go ahead, John.
The resources in Scotland and Wales, particularly around wind, are far in advance of what's available in England, just because we have a lack of projects to draw on. Although there is the guys in Bristol did a really good job with getting their one done. It's going to be an output of the Energy Learning Network to quite rapidly share that sort of knowledge. And we've already updated the how-to guides on the Community Energy England website with a specific community wind page. So watch this space for that, but definitely heard your need there.
At the risk of speaking too much, sorry. So a couple of things that actually I think came up in Liam's group as well that might be really useful for thinking about the future workshops as well was, similarly, a lot of people in our group had experienced those network connection issues. And so I know with the new incoming government is working with Ofgem to try and address the waiting list problem and zombie projects and all of that kind of stuff. But it might be really interesting to look at, how quickly is that going to have an impact for the SPEN area, and what can people expect to see on that. And then linked to that, there was also a discussion about how can communities tie in the demand side alongside, what can communities do to help connect in a potentially constrained situation by, having batteries or having demand side management, or, linking it into sort of energy local models, that kind of thing. It would be interesting to have a discussion. Is that something that SPEN can help out with and give people more guidance about what is actually going to help? Because I know it can vary very much from one situation to another, depending on what the load on the grid is. So having a bit more kind of guidance or useful dialogue around what can communities do within their own community to help with connection where there's a constrained grid connection, to get those kind of win-wins of demand side management alongside renewables.
Yeah, so I can step in here, and Louise, if there's anything you'd like to add, feel free. But on our end, we have been in discussions with our kind of three set teams, with connections, the flexibility team, and our strategic optimizers. So our strategic optimizers look at the heat maps, local heat plans, and the kind of next 5 to 10 year long term. How is the network in specific areas going to look? And a lot of what they're doing just now is kind of building the tools so that information can become a lot more accessible. Myself and Louise are in the process of trying to understand just how they go about this, and how that thinking is inspired, and what goes into it as far as displaying that. So our hope would be, between myself and Louise, that the more we can understand that and get to grips with it, the more that we can kind of then re-dilute that and put that out in a sense of, well, this is the inner workings of the company, this is what we're doing, and this is the projects and plans going forward. I think just on a second basis, from a flexibility point of view, the team there are looking to develop a document within the next week or two, which again should show additional opportunities for different community energy groups to potentially enter into that flexibility market as well, and from a commercial point of view, look to get other sources of revenue through their projects. So I think those would be the kind of two main aspects. But as I say, I think the best way to communicate that information is from the horse's mouth. So a lot of the work myself and Louise are doing is going to these teams and going to these departments and trying on our end to find out as much as we can, because we appreciate that, a lot of posts that can get put out on social media can kind of fly past the radar and are missed. I think with the two of us as two central points, if we have that information, we can kind of put it across a lot easier. So that is something that we are in the process of doing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Liam. Thanks, Graham. Unless there's any other burning questions, I think I'll draw a close to this session there. Just want to say thank you again to all our presenters for some fantastic presentations, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, there'll be 2 follow-up events later this year, early next year. More details on these events and how to register them will be sent to you via email, I think, shortly. If you do have any follow-up questions, or you would like more information on any of the items discussed this evening, please contact this inbox in the chat. I'll just put there, and we'll answer any questions that you have as soon as we can. So I think that's it for now. Thanks again for joining, and have a good rest of your evenings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.